In this video, we're going to review properties of real numbers. Those are the most fundamental properties. Properties, by the way, means laws, rules that we have to follow in math. If we don't, it won't lead you to the correct answers in the end. So these are super, super important. Community property. Community property is very easy. All it is that the order doesn't really matter. The order of operation doesn't really matter in additions and multiplications. So A times B is the same as B times A. So if I do 3 plus 5 is 8, 5 plus 3 is also 8. 3 times 5 is 15, and 5 times 3 is also 15. So that we call commutative property. Associate property, it just means that whichever term I'm associated with, that order also doesn't really matter. So now on the right-hand side as I'm writing, B can be associated in the parentheses with C, and I still have the same thing. So here's an example. I give you 3 plus 2 plus 1. If I put the parentheses here, 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 1 is 6. On the right-hand side, I will write the same order, but now I put the parentheses between 2 plus 1. 2 plus 1 is 3, and then 3 plus 3 is still 6. So they equal each other. Same thing with multiplications. If I do A times B first times C, that should make no difference as A times B times C. So if I do 3 times 5, that's 15. 15 times 2, that left-hand side would give me 30. On the right-hand side, if I do 5 times 2 first, that gives me 10. 10 times 3 gives me 30. So they equal each other. Oops, I used the wrong color. I will just do this way. That's an example. As to fix the color. Identity is a little tricky, but I don't want you to memorize it. Throughout higher level math, you're going to learn about identity is about the number itself or the term itself. So if I want to do an addition without changing A being A, it's A plus 0 equals A, right? So if I give you an example, is 3 plus 0 is still 3. So I always say identity is like yourself looking in the mirror. Whoever you are is whoever you see in the mirror. So we put an A in front of the mirror. In addition, if I add a 0, then it doesn't change A. In multiplication, however, I cannot do that. I have to multiply it by 1. That's when I get if I do 3 times 1 equals 3, right? And this is because it's not on this list. There's a 0 property that applies to multiplications. We'll worry about that later. But not to change the number or the term by itself in multiplications. All you do is to multiply it by 1. Inverse. Inverse means the opposite. So if I have a term and I add the opposite, I would have 0. So I'll give you an example of 3 plus negative 3. That should be 0. You can explain it with a number line. You can explain it with a calculator. And with multiplication, the inverse is the reciprocal, meaning A is A over 1. So I put it reciprocal, 1 over A, I would have 1. That's the inverse property. So if I have 3, I have to multiply 1 over 3. That gives me 1. So again, this is all because it's multiplication here, right? Addition, it would be a different rule in that case. Finally, probably the most important and probably the thing that you see most frequently in algebra is distributive property, and there is no English words that explains it as clearly as these two arrows. It just means that you have to distribute the a to every single term while maintaining this oops, sorry. How do I undo this? While maintaining, this will do. Maintaining this operation. Notice the operation in the parentheses determines the operation you will have outside after the distribution. So in other words, if I have a times b minus c inside, after I distribute the a, I have a times b. Now in this case, it's minus a times c. Notice the operation inside the parentheses determines the operation outside the parentheses after you distribute. So finally, a quick note about multiplication, how we use multiplication signs. There are so many different ways to write it. In elementary school, you learned this, 3 times 5. You use a little x, right, to express that's multiplication. And you also stack them up when you do operations. This is just easier for us to see. So those are more basic elementary level, middle school level. At the high school, I tend to get lazy. Most often you've seen that I've done that above. I just use a dot in between. Sometimes, this I really like, I use a parentheses to protect a term. And this is particularly true when I have negative signs. And other times I use parentheses to protect both terms. Because parentheses are bodyguards. You cannot change that without specific rules that guides you there, right? So this is a quick review of real properties. And below there is a multiplication table. You need to fill it out, and I will see you in class. Bye, guys.